Welcome to Infidelity Stories. Please like this video and subscribe. We're grateful for each and every one of you. We'd love to hear from you in the comments. I accidentally touched my stepson's leg under the dinner table. You don't plan for moments like these. They sneak up on you, quiet and unassuming, until suddenly your world shifts and nothing feels the same. It was a Tuesday night, ordinary in every way. Dinner was simple: roast chicken, steamed vegetables, and a bottle of red wine that David opened but didn't drink much of. He was always distracted, glued to his phone or buried in work, even at the dinner table. Sebastian had only been living with us for a few months, but his presence changed everything. At 29, he was still trying to figure out his life, moving back home after a failed business venture. David thought he was being responsible, giving his son a place to regroup. I thought it was a ticking time bomb, ready to explode under the pressure of their mismatched expectations. The accidental touch happened midway through dinner. My foot shifted under the table, brushing against Seb's leg. It was a fleeting moment, so small it shouldn't have mattered. But the way he looked at me after, his eyes dark and searching, made my breath catch. I told myself it was nothing, an accident, a moment that would pass. But it didn't. That touch lingered, haunting me long after the plates were cleared and the house went quiet. And as much as I tried to ignore it, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted between us. This is the story of how a single moment unraveled everything I thought I knew about myself, my marriage, and the delicate line between right and wrong. It's funny how your life can feel full and empty at the same time. That's how I often describe my marriage to David. He's a good man by any conventional measure. Successful, stable, and dependable. But that stability has always come with a cost, a distance between us that no amount of time together could seem to bridge. I met David 17 years ago at a design expo. I was there editing a freelance piece on emerging architectural trends, and he was presenting one of his firm's projects. He swept me off my feet with his confidence and vision, painting a picture of a future that felt like it had room for me. I thought I'd finally found someone who could be my partner in every sense of the word. But over time, David's world became narrower, consumed by deadlines, clients, and blueprints. I became a supporting character in his life, a role I played so well that even I started to forget who I was before him. When David's son, Sebastian, moved back in, it added a new dynamic to our already fragile balance. Sebastian, or Seb as I'd come to call him, was 29 and carrying the weight of a failure he didn't talk about. His startup, some tech venture David had enthusiastically funded, had crashed after less than a year. I didn't know the details, only that it left Seb adrift and David quietly disappointed. "Give him time," David said one evening as we sat in the living room. "He's figuring things out." "Time won't fix everything," I replied, my voice sharper than I intended. David shot me a look, his brow furrowing. "He's my son, Myria, he needs our support." I nodded, biting back the retort that hovered on the tip of my tongue. Seb wasn't an easy presence in the house. He spent most of his time holed up in his room, emerging only for meals or the occasional late-night beer. When we did interact, it was polite but guarded, as though we were both waiting for the other to make the first move. I tried to connect with him in small ways, leaving fresh towels on his bed, making his favorite meals, but he never seemed to notice. Or if he did, he didn't acknowledge it. Still, there were moments when I saw glimpses of the person he used to be. Like when he'd play piano in the evenings, his fingers moving effortlessly over the keys, filling the house with music that felt too big for its walls. In those moments, I felt a flicker of something I couldn't quite name. The night it happened, everything started out so ordinary. David had been working late, as usual, and I was left to prepare dinner on my own. I roasted chicken, steamed vegetables, and uncorked a bottle of red wine that I knew David would only sip once before setting aside. Seb came downstairs just as I was setting the table, his hair mussed as though he'd just rolled out of bed. "Good," he said, his voice low. "Thanks," I replied, offering a faint smile. David arrived shortly after, loosening his tie as he walked in the door. "Sorry I'm late," he said, brushing a kiss across my cheek. We sat down together, a rare occurrence these days, and began eating in silence, the only sounds the clinking of cutlery and the occasional rustle of David's phone as he checked his messages. It happened halfway through the meal. I shifted in my seat, stretching my legs beneath the table, and my foot brushed against something warm. I froze, realizing a moment too late that it was Seb's leg. "Sorry," I murmured, pulling my foot back. "It's fine," Seb said quickly, his voice calm but his eyes darting to mine. The moment passed in an instant, but it left a charge in the air that I couldn't ignore. For the rest of the meal, I was hyper-aware of him. The way he shifted in his seat, the way his fingers strung lightly against the table, the way he glanced at me when he thought I wasn't looking. After dinner, David retreated to his office to catch up on work, leaving me to clear the table. Seb lingered in the kitchen, leaning against the counter as I loaded the dishwasher. "Dinner was good," he said, his voice softer than usual. "Thanks," I replied, not looking up. There was a pause, heavy and charged. I felt his eyes on me, and when I finally turned to face him, I saw something in his expression that made my breath catch. He looked away quickly, clearing his throat. "Good night," he said, disappearing up the stairs before I could respond. That night, as I lay in bed beside David, I couldn't stop replaying the moment under the table. It was such a small thing, so fleeting, but it felt like the beginning of something I couldn't quite define. I told myself I was imagining it, that it was nothing. But deep down, I knew better. The days that followed were a blur of avoidance and stolen glances. Seb and I danced around each other, our interactions charged with an unspoken tension that neither of us seemed willing to address. I found myself hyper-aware of his presence in a way that both thrilled and terrified me. The sound of his footsteps on the stairs, the scent of his cologne lingering in the hallway, the way his voice softened when he spoke to me, all of it felt magnified, impossible to ignore. David, oblivious to the undercurrents in the house, continued to bury himself in work. He'd leave early in the mornings and return late at night, often too exhausted to do more than exchange a few pleasantries before heading to bed. "You've been quiet lately," he remarked one evening as we sat on the couch. "Just tired," I replied, forcing a smile. He nodded, already distracted by the emails on his phone. A few nights later, I found myself in the kitchen, unable to sleep. I was pouring a glass of water when I heard footsteps behind me. "Couldn't sleep?" Seb asked, his voice low. I turned to find him standing in the doorway, his hair disheveled and his expression unreadable. "Something like that," I replied. He stepped closer, leaning against the counter. "Same here." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence between us was thick, heavy with everything we weren't saying. "About the other night?" Seb began, his voice trailing off. "It was nothing," I said quickly, my heart racing. "Was it?" he asked, his eyes locking onto mine. I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came. After that late-night encounter in the kitchen, the tension in the house became unbearable. Seb and I continued to avoid any direct acknowledgement of what had passed between us, but it lingered, simmering beneath every word, every glance, every breath. I tried to convince myself that it was all in my head, a fabrication of a restless mind and a lonely heart. But deep down, I knew better. It was a Saturday morning, unseasonably warm for spring. David had left early for a site visit, leaving Seb and me alone in the house. I stayed in my room longer than usual, hoping to avoid the awkwardness of sharing the same space. But hunger eventually won out, and I ventured downstairs to make breakfast. Seb was already there, sitting at the kitchen island with a mug of coffee and his laptop open in front of him. He looked up as I entered, his expression unreadable. "Morning," he said, his voice low. "Morning," I replied, keeping my tone light. I busied myself at the stove, determined to keep the interaction brief. But as the minutes ticked by, I felt his gaze on me, heavy and searching. "Do you want eggs?" I asked, my voice too bright. "Sure," he said, setting his mug down. The silence stretched as I scrambled the eggs, the only sound the soft sizzle of the pan. I could feel the tension thickening, pressing down on me like a weight. As we ate, I tried to make small talk, asking about his plans for the day. He answered in clipped sentences, his usual aloofness amplified by something I couldn't quite name. Finally, he set his fork down and looked at me, his expression serious. "Myria," he began, his voice soft but steady. "Can we talk about what's been happening?" I froze, my breath catching in my throat. "There's nothing to talk about," I said quickly, my words spilling out in a rush. His brow furrowed, frustration flickering across his face. "You keep saying that, but it's not true. We both know it's not." "Seb? I'm not trying to make this harder for you," he interrupted, his voice gentler now, "but I can't keep pretending like nothing's changed." I stared at him, my heart pounding. "It was an accident," I said, my voice trembling. "That's all it was." He shook his head, his gaze unwavering. "It wasn't just the touch, Myria. It's everything since then. The way we avoid each other, the way you look at me." I opened my mouth to argue, but no words came. Later that afternoon, I decided to get out of the house, hoping a change of scenery would help clear my mind. I went to the park, a quiet place I often visited when I needed to think. I didn't expect Seb to follow me. I was sitting on a bench, staring at the small pond in the center of the park when I heard his voice. "Mind if I join you?" he asked. I glanced up, startled to see him standing there, his hands stuffed into the pockets of his jacket. "Sure," I said after a moment, scooting over to make room. He sat down beside me, his shoulder brushing mine briefly. For a while, neither of us spoke. We watched the ducks glide across the water, their movements calm and unhurried. This used to be my favorite spot, Seb said finally, breaking the silence. Really? He nodded. When I was a kid, my mom used to bring me here. We'd sit by the pond for hours, feeding the ducks and talking about everything and nothing. There was a wistfulness in his voice, a vulnerability I hadn't seen before. I miss her, he said quietly. I felt a pang of sympathy, my chest tightening. She'd be proud of you, you know? He laughed bitterly, shaking his head. I doubt that. She would, I insisted. You're smart, talented, and resilient. She'd see that. Seb turned to look at me, his eyes softening. You're the only one who thinks so. The sun was beginning to set, casting the park in hues of gold and pink. I stood, brushing off my hands. We should head back. Seb nodded, but as I turned to leave he reached for my hand, stopping me in my tracks. Maria, he said, his voice low. I turned to face him, my heart pounding. Thank you, he said, his gaze holding mine. For being there, for seeing me. Before I could respond, he let go of my hand, his touch lingering, even after he stepped away. That night, I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned, my mind racing with thoughts of Seb in the moment in the park. Around midnight, I went downstairs to get some water, hoping the cool air would help clear my head. I wasn't expecting to find Seb there, sitting on the couch with a glass of whiskey in his hand. Couldn't sleep? He asked, his voice low and rough. No, I admitted, crossing the room to sit beside him. For a while we sat in silence, the only sound the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. I keep thinking about the park, Seb said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. I turned to look at him, my chest tightening. Seb? I know it's wrong, he said, his words tumbling out in a rush. I know we shouldn't. But I can't stop feeling this way. My breath caught, and I felt a rush of emotions, fear, guilt, longing all colliding at once. Seb, we can't, I said, my voice trembling. It's not right. Why not? He asked, his eyes searching mine. Why can't we just be honest about what we feel? I didn't have an answer. He leaned closer, his gaze flicking to my lips before meeting my eyes again. Maria, he whispered, his voice breaking. And then before I could stop him or myself, I closed the distance between us. The kiss was brief, tentative, but it felt like the culmination of every unspoken word, every stolen glance, every moment that had led us here. When it ended, we both pulled back, breathless and stunned. I'm sorry, I said quickly, standing and moving away from him. Don't be, he said softly, his eyes following me. But I was. I was sorry for everything, the kiss, the feelings I couldn't seem to control, and the line we just crossed. In the days following that kiss, the house felt like a trap, every corner brimming with the weight of what we'd done. I tried to maintain a facade of normalcy, but it was like walking a tightrope over a chasm, each step more precarious than the last. Seb and I didn't talk about it, not directly. But the air between us was thick with unspoken words, and the tension only grew with every passing day. David, oblivious as ever, continued to bury himself in his work, his presence in the house more of a shadow than a reality. He'd leave early, come home late, and spend most evenings in his office, poring over blueprints and spreadsheets. And yet, even his absence wasn't enough to ease my guilt. I tried to avoid Seb as much as possible. I started leaving the house early, taking long walks or spending hours at the library under the pretense of needing a change of scenery. But no matter how far I went, I couldn't escape my thoughts or the memory of that night. One afternoon, as I was returning from one of my self-imposed exiles, I found Seb in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner. You've been out a lot lately, he said without looking up. Just needed some fresh air, I replied, forcing my voice to sound casual. He glanced at me, his expression unreadable. You don't have to avoid me, you know? I'm not avoiding you, I said quickly, too quickly. He smirked, setting the knife down, right? I felt my cheeks flush and turned to leave, but his voice stopped me. Maria, he said softly, and the way he said my name made my heart ache. I paused, my back to him. I'm not sorry about what happened, he said. Are you? I didn't answer. I couldn't. Instead, I walked away, my chest tightening with every step. It was only a matter of time before David started to notice the shift in the household dynamic. You've been quiet lately, he remarked one evening as we sat at the dinner table. I shrugged, keeping my eyes on my plate, just tired. David nodded, but his gaze lingered on me a moment longer than usual. Later that night, as I was getting ready for bed, he appeared in the doorway of our bedroom. Is everything okay? He asked, his tone cautious. Of course, I replied, forcing a smile. He hesitated, his eyes searching mine. You'd tell me if something was wrong, wouldn't you? Of course, I repeated, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. He nodded slowly, but I could see the doubt flickering in his eyes. One night, unable to sleep, I went downstairs to make tea. The house was quiet, the kind of stillness that felt almost oppressive. I was pouring water into the teapot when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned to find Seb standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable. Couldn't sleep? He asked, his voice low. I shook my head, my heart pounding. He stepped into the kitchen, his presence filling the space in a way that made it hard to breathe. Myria, he began, his voice soft but firm. We can't keep pretending like nothing's happening. I set the teapot down, my hands trembling. Seb, please. No, he said, stepping closer. I need to say this. He paused, his eyes searching mine. I care about you more than I should, and I know this is complicated, but I can't ignore what I feel. His words hit me like a tidal wave, and for a moment, I couldn't speak. Seb, this isn't right, I said finally, my voice trembling. Maybe not, he replied, but it's real. The next day I met my friend Margaret for coffee. She was one of the few people who'd stuck by me through the ups and downs of my marriage, her sharp wit and no-nonsense attitude a source of both comfort and frustration. You seem distracted, she said, eyeing me over the rim of her cup. Just a lot on my mind, I replied, stirring my tea. She raised an eyebrow. Anything you want to talk about? No, I said quickly, too quickly. Her eyes narrowed, her gaze piercing. You know you're a terrible liar. I laughed nervously, shaking my head. It's nothing really. Margaret leaned back in her chair, her expression skeptical. Whatever it is, just be careful. Secrets have a way of coming out when you least expect them. Her words stayed with me long after we parted ways. David decided to host a small family gathering the following weekend, a barbecue in the backyard, just the three of us and a few of his colleagues. I spent the day preparing food, my nerves on edge as I tried to juggle the logistics of hosting with the constant undercurrent of tension between Seb and me. As the guests arrived, I plastered on a smile, falling into the familiar rhythm of playing hostess. But no matter how hard I tried to focus on the conversation, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to go wrong. It happened toward the end of the evening. Most of the guests had left, and David was in the kitchen cleaning up. Seb and I were outside, gathering the last of the plates from the patio table. As I reached for a plate, my hand brushed against his and the contact sent a jolt through me. Myria, he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. I froze, my heart pounding. Before I could respond, David stepped outside, his eyes narrowing as he took in the scene. What's going on here? He asked, his tone sharp. Nothing, I said quickly, stepping back. David's gaze flicked between us, suspicion darkening his expression. You've been acting strange lately, he said, his voice tight. Both of you. David, you're imagining things, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Am I? He shot back, his eyes narrowing. The silence that followed was deafening. That night, I lay awake, the weight of David's suspicion pressing down on me like a physical force. I knew it was only a matter of time before the truth came to light. Seb, too, seemed on edge, his usual confidence replaced with a quiet tension that I hadn't seen before. We were on a collision course and there was no way to stop it. Secrets have a way of growing heavier with time, like stones in your pocket as you wade into deep water. Every step feels harder. Every breath tighter. I thought I could carry the weight of mine forever, but as the days passed, I began to realize that the truth has a way of surfacing, no matter how deeply you try to bury it. The kiss with Seb was like a splinter I couldn't pull out. It festered in every quiet moment, invading my thoughts when I least expected it. I replayed it endlessly, the feel of his lips, the way his hand had lingered on mine, the way he'd whispered my name like it meant something. But what haunted me most was the look in his eyes afterward. Hope, longing, and something else I couldn't quite name. I told myself it had to end. That night, I had vowed to myself that it wouldn't happen again. But the more I tried to distance myself, the closer we seemed to drift. A few days after the barbecue, I found myself in the kitchen early one morning, staring blankly at the coffee pot as it sputtered and hissed. David had already left for work, his absence a relief. Seb walked in a few minutes later, his hair still mussed from sleep. He was wearing a plain gray t-shirt and sweatpants, his usual casual attire, but something about the way he carried himself made it impossible to look away. Morning, he said, his voice thick with sleep. Morning, I replied, keeping my eyes on the coffee pot. For a moment we stood in silence, the tension between us palpable. Myria, he said finally, his voice soft. I turned to face him, my chest tightening at the way he was looking at me. I can't keep doing this, he said, his tone quiet but firm, pretending like nothing's wrong. There's nothing wrong, I said quickly, though my voice lacked conviction. He stepped closer, his gaze never leaving mine. You don't believe that any more than I do. I opened my mouth to respond, but the words caught in my throat. Later that afternoon, I went for a walk to clear my head. The park had become my refuge, a place where I could pretend, if only for a little while, that my life wasn't unraveling. I sat on a bench near the pond, watching the ducks glide across the water. The spring air was warm, the scent of blooming flowers heavy in the breeze. I was so lost in thought that I didn't hear Seb approach until he spoke. Mind if I join you? I looked up, startled to see him standing there. Sure, I said after a moment, scooting over to make room. He sat down beside me, his shoulder brushing mine. For a while, neither of us spoke, the silence between us filled with unspoken words. I've been thinking, he said finally, his voice low. About what? I asked, though I already knew. About us, he said, his gaze fixed on the pond. About what happened? I felt my chest tighten, the weight of his words pressing down on me. It can't happen again, I said, my voice trembling. Why not? He asked, turning to face me. Because it's wrong, I said, though the words felt hollow. Seb shook his head, his expression a mix of frustration and sadness. Do you really believe that? Yes, I said, though my voice wavered. He reached for my hand, his touch sending a jolt through me. Myria, I care about you more than I should, and I think you feel the same. I pulled my hand away, tears stinging my eyes. Seb, please don't do this. That evening David came home earlier than usual, his presence a reminder of the life I was supposed to be living. He kissed my cheek as he walked into the kitchen, his touch brief and perfunctory. What's for dinner? He asked, his tone distracted. Roast chicken, I replied, forcing a smile. He nodded, already scrolling through his phone. As we ate, I found myself watching him, searching for some sign of the man I had married all those years ago. But he was a stranger to me now, his attention always elsewhere. For the first time, I wondered if he even noticed the growing distance between us or if he cared. 2 nights later, everything came to a head. It started with a simple question. David had been working late again, and I was cleaning up after dinner when he walked in, his expression tense. We need to talk, he said, his tone clipped. About what? I asked, though my stomach churned with unease. About you and Seb, he said, his eyes narrowing. I froze, my heart pounding. What about us? Don't play dumb, Myria, he snapped. I've seen the way he looks at you and the way you've been acting lately. Something's going on. You're being ridiculous, I said quickly, though my voice shook. Am I? He shot back, stepping closer. Because it doesn't feel that way. The argument escalated quickly, his accusations growing sharper with every word. Do you even love me anymore? He demanded, his voice breaking. I stared at him, my chest tightening. David, I don't, he said, cutting me off. Don't lie to me. For a moment, the room was silent, the weight of his words hanging heavy in the air. I don't know, I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. His face fell, the anger draining from his expression, replaced by something else, something I couldn't quite place. David left that night, slamming the door behind him. I didn't try to stop him. Seb found me sitting on the couch, my face buried in my hands. He knows, I said, my voice trembling. Seb sat down beside me, his hand resting lightly on my shoulder. What happens now? He asked, his voice soft. I don't know, I admitted. But it's not going to be easy. That night, as I lay awake in bed, I found myself replaying the argument with David, his words echoing in my mind. Do you even love me anymore? The truth was I didn't know. I didn't know if I ever had, or if I'd simply convinced myself that I did because it was easier than admitting the alternative. What I did know was that my life was unraveling. And there was no going back. When you've lived with a secret long enough, it starts to shape you. It curls around your decisions, whispers in your silences, and stands between you and the people who think they know you. That night, after David left, I felt the full weight of the choices I'd made. Seb's presence beside me on the couch should have been a comfort, but instead it was a reminder of the thin line we'd crossed. A line I wasn't sure we could ever come back from. The next morning, I woke to an empty house. David hadn't returned and Seb was nowhere to be seen. The silence was oppressive, wrapping around me like a heavy blanket. I moved through the motions of my morning routine, showering, making coffee, tidying the kitchen, but everything felt off, like I was living someone else's life. I kept checking my phone, half expecting a message from David, but the screen stayed dark. Part of me wanted to call him to try to explain, but I didn't know where to start. What could I say that wouldn't make things worse? It wasn't until late afternoon that Seb came home. I heard the front door open and his footsteps in the hall, but I didn't move from my spot on the couch. Myria, he said softly, stepping into the room. I turned to face him, my chest tightening at the look in his eyes. I think I should leave, he said, his voice steady but tinged with sadness. What? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. This isn't fair to you or to David, he said, running a hand through his hair. I thought staying here would help me figure things out, but it's just made everything more complicated. You don't have to leave, I said quickly, my heart pounding. Yes, I do, he replied, his gaze unwavering. It's the only way any of us can move forward. I felt tears prick the corners of my eyes, but I blinked them away. Where will you go? I don't know, he admitted, but I'll figure it out. David came home that evening, his expression hard and unreadable. He barely looked at me as he set his bag down and walked into the kitchen. Did you eat? I asked hesitantly, following him. I'm fine, he replied curtly, pouring himself a glass of water. The silence between us was suffocating. I wanted to say something, anything, to bridge the growing chasm, but I didn't know where to start. Finally, he set his glass down and turned to face me. Do you love him? He asked. His voice quiet but filled with pain. The question caught me off guard, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. David, I began, but the words caught in my throat. He nodded, his expression tightening. That's what I thought. The next day Sep packed his things. I watched from the doorway as he stuffed clothes into a duffel bag, my chest aching with every movement. When he was finished, he turned to face me, his expression soft but resolute. I'll miss you, he said simply. I nodded, unable to speak. He stepped closer, his hand brushing mine briefly before he pulled away. Take care of yourself, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. And then he was gone. With Sep gone, the house felt emptier than ever. David and I moved through our days like strangers, exchanging only the bare minimum of words. The tension between us was unbearable, but neither of us seemed willing or able to address it. One evening, as we sat in the living room in silence, David finally spoke. I can't do this anymore, he said, his voice quiet but firm. I looked at him, my chest tightening. What do you mean? He sighed, running a hand through his hair. This marriage, whatever we've been pretending it is. It's over, Myria. The words hit me like a blow, but deep down I knew he was right. The divorce was finalized 3 months later. It was amicable as far as divorces go, but the process was still painful. Signing those papers felt like closing the door on a part of my life I wasn't ready to let go of, even if it had been falling apart for years. Afterward, I moved into a small apartment downtown. It wasn't much, but it was mine, and for the first time in years I felt a sense of freedom. One day, a few weeks after the divorce was finalized, I received a letter in the mail. The handwriting on the envelope was unmistakable, and my heart skipped a beat as I opened it. Dear Myria, I hope this finds you well. I've been thinking about you a lot lately, wondering how you're doing. Leaving was the hardest thing I've ever had to do, but I know it was the right decision. I wanted to thank you. For everything. For seeing me when no one else did, for believing in me when I couldn't believe in myself. You gave me something I didn't think I'd ever find, a sense of purpose. I'm doing better now, working on something I think you'd be proud of. I hope you find happiness, Myria. You deserve it. Always, Sep. Tears blurred my vision as I folded the letter, clutching it to my chest. Looking back, I can see how everything unraveled. The choices I made, the lines I crossed, they were born from a place of longing and pain I didn't fully understand at the time. But I've learned to forgive myself, even if others never will. Life isn't perfect, and neither are we. But sometimes in the midst of the chaos, we find clarity and the strength to start over. Share this video with your friends if you think they'll enjoy this story too. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss a video in the future. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel.